What if the most successful humans in Ice Age Europe weren't us? Picture a night so cold the stars feel made of glass, a small fire breathing in a cave, and faces lit by orange light, broad-browed, strong, careful. Neanderthals, not monsters, masters. For 400,000 years they outlasted storms, hunted giants, healed one another, and left marks in stone that waited 60 millennia to be seen. Get comfortable. Pillows, blankets, slow breath in and out, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from tonight. Then close your eyes. We're going back to meet the people whose story still runs in our blood. The cold has a taste, almost sweet, almost metal, and it sits on your tongue as the world brightens from black to a thin blue that rim rocks and snowfields accept without hurry. Breath leaves your mouth in soft clouds that curl and vanish. The shelter, an overhang of limestone with a low windbreak of stacked stone, holds last night's warmth like a cupped hand. In the middle, the fire is a quiet animal, spine of embers, skin of ash. A woman settles a sling of hide above it, a looped tripod of saplings holding the weight. Inside the sling, water shivers. She feeds in knuckle-sized stones she has heated at the edge of the coals. They hiss when they enter, tumbling among thumb-length chips of bone crushed on the flat anvil rock. Chips from long bones, split and pounded, until they are more gravel than bone. She stirs with a smoothed stick. After a moment, beads bloom on the surface, pale, clean, fat gathering like winter moons. She breathes out through her nose, patient, sure. Out in the snow, a man's shape steps from the birches, a red deer dragging by a thong at his belt. The skin along its flank is pierced in the right places. The weight rides his hips, not his back. He has walked since the night. His face is set the way a face gets when tasks are not a surprise. He does not call out. The camp rises to meet him anyway. 2 other hunters to the forelegs, one to set a prop under the head, a girl to fetch the long flakes tucked into a rawhide roll, a boy to pull the sled closer and then stand very still, watching. There is a plan in the skinning. There is always a plan. Shallow cuts and long pulls, the hide lifts in a single coat, fat whispering against the bright edges. The flint is thin and bright as ice. It came from a core made last moon on the ridge with the good stone, Levallois dome prepared by a napper whose hands know the geometry by feel and the bruise on the heel of the palm. A single strike lifted this flake, prepared platform, angle precise, force correct, and the ripple lines along its underside are a memory of that blow. The flake bites with almost no weight. Sinew appears like pale river rope, and is freed with careful pulls, coiled into loops, around a wrist to dry and tighten into thread and bindings. Long bones go to the woman at the sling. Ribs give way to a sore stroke and a crack. The cavity opens and steam writes a fast story in the air. Children stand where they can see but not get kicked if someone slips. They copy without knives, hands gripping wooden sticks the way the adults grip stone, bodies turning the way the adults turn to keep the sun off the work so the edge can be read without glare. A boy reaches toward the sling, and the woman tilts the stick so a stone surfaces, hissing, then sinks. He pulls his hand back and nods as if they have spoken. They have, with gestures and looks and a soft grunt that means wait, and another that means now. The fat rises and is ladled into a bladder, with the mouth bound tight by a rawhide thong. Later it will harden to something that slices like stiff cheese. The marrow is scooped from femurs with a small spoon made from a shoulder blade. The scoop's edge is burnished from years of salt and fat passing over it. Bits of meat, thin, long, are hung on a rack of willow above low smoke. They will darken and dry, wind licking them steady, a kind of weather you can eat. Some meat goes to the hot stones for today, some to a skin bag with rendered fat and dried berries pounded in, packed until the mixture takes a thumb's print and holds it, food that does not rot until the world turns green again. At the mouth of the shelter, a napper kneels over a flint nodule and wakes its inside. First, the roughing hard hammer blows with a riverstone to remove cortex and square the mass. Then the preparation. Small exact taps to build platforms, faceting to steer the coming blow, pressure to shape the dome the way a hill shapes wind. He sees through the stone the way a hunter sees through brush, a future held inside the present. When the core is ready, he lifts the softer hammer, antler with a burnished crown. A breath, a swing, a sound like wet glass cracking in a warm room, and a new flake rides into his hand, thin as a leaf, longer than his palm, edges bright enough to paint his knuckles red if he forgets they are there. He does not forget. He presses the spine along a stick to test the fit, reaches for a twist of sinew, and glances to the woman by the fire. She lifts the lid of a shallow pit, plucks out a roll of birch bark that sweats black along the edges, and hands him a lump with the weight and feel of thought. Tar. He smears a smear, wraps a wrap, smooths with spit and thumb, and the stone is married to wood. The join will hold in wet and cold and when hands are numb. The shelter has its own weather. Smoke pools, then slides out along the ceiling where soot has blackened rock to velvet. Lamps of marrow fat burn in scalloped stone cups near the back wall. Wicks chewed from plant fibre holding fire the way a throat holds a song. The floor is chalk slick where feet have polished it. Sleeping skins, arid at dawn, weight rolled against the wall with pebbles set to hold them ready, each in its place. A small niche holds the things that are not for every day. A talon necklace, glossy from the neck it sits against. A figure from antler with its face rubbed smooth by thumbs. A handful of shells with holes drilled neat and traded twice from a sea no one here has seen. Above the niche, 4 short lines cut in rock. Then a space, then 4, then a space, then one longer. Moon marks, a memory you can touch. Outside, the valley lies in bands. Birch, willow, reed, then the white ribbon of the river, skin pulled tight over muscle. Hoof marks pucker the snow on the flats, edges frozen bead hard. A fox wrote a sentence across them last night, tail print punctuating each phrase. Upslope wind combed the drifts into waves that will bear weight if you step with faith at the right interval and swallow you if you don't. You read the ground the way you read a face. The herd will come again along the same line. It always does when the wind is in this quarter and the ice locked to the far bank. Not today. Today the work is here, scraping, stitching, tending, turning the day's catch into a month's insurance. A girl sits with a hide stretched on a frame of willow, a curved scraper in her hands. Push, lift, wreath, push. The rhythm gets under the skin as surely as the cold. Another loosens a tangled skein of hair, fingers finding the same knot again and again until it surrenders, then plats it into a rope that will take a bead. A boy carries armfuls of willow to the windbreak and learns how to stack with gaps that steal the wind's teeth. The old man, old because the village says so, because he remembers 2 floods and too many winters and 3 kinds of cough, leans on his carved stick and watches the deer's hide come away in one piece. He points once, small, a correction of angle that will keep a blade keen and fingers whole. His left hand is a club, thumb lost long ago. His right shoulder creaks, a healed break remembered by weather. He knows where the flint ridge breathes in spring when the snow goes thin on it first. He knows which birches leak bark that will burn even when soaked. He knows 100 edges you cannot see unless you stand where he tells you, and tilt your head the way he shows you. Wind rises and the camp pulls tighter. The deer's head is levered into a pot of snow to chill the cheeks, a delicacy for the evening. The sling bubbles slow as the woman adds fresh bone meal and lifts out another shining scoop of fat, tipping it into the bladder until it bulges and glows. She ties it off with a loop you can ease with cold fingers and hangs it in the shade where it will harden to a pale drum. She wipes her hands on snow, smells them, smiles. The smell means tomorrow's hunger will be quieter. When the light turns thin as horn, someone kindles a new fire from the old with a shower of sparks struck from flint and iron-rich stone. Easier today than waiting for a storm's gift. The tinder, fungus scraped and fluffed, dry grass nested, takes at once. A breath and a cupped hand and a spark grows to a tongue, to a mouth, to a body that eats politely if you feed it small to big, patient to bold. The flames paint the overhang in animal colours. Faces appear out of the dusk, brows heavy, eyes bright, lines grooved by cold and laughter, scars that tell stories if you ask the right person. Meat sings on hot stones, fat runs and spits. A child's cough quiets in the warmed air, then returns, then quiets again and sleeps. Someone hums, not a tune so much as a line the night can lean against. The youngest presses a palm to the limestone, fingers spread, then laughs when the chill kisses skin. The old man takes a hand and presses it again, the exact same span, and sand grazes over both, leaving a red dust print on the stone's grey. He blows the extra away. The child's eyes widen. The wall keeps the hand like a promise. The sky outside has pulled on its black coat and stitched in enough stars to make the cold seem friendly. The herd will pass tomorrow or the day after. The snow will scallop differently when they do. The ravens will arrive first with their opinions. Tonight the camp tightens itself like a fist and then opens, then tightens and opens again, with each sleeping breath, each watch change, each small crack of ice in the river's skin. The sling over the fire is quieter now, stones cooling to dull. Tar in the lidded pit is the right kind of sticky, not too soft even when warm. The new flake's edge will still be keen in the morning. The deer's hide will be ready to soften. The wind will move and you will read it, and the day will ask the same questions it always asks in winter. What do you have? What can you make? Who stands with you? And your hands will answer without words while the lamp's little flame writes small gold ovals onto the rock, and the cold outside leans close to listen. Morning is work before light. You wake to the sound of a stick turning coals and the quiet breath the fire makes when it remembers itself. Frost flowers grow and vanish on the inside of your nose. You roll from the sleeping skins and your feet find the chalk-smooth floor by memory, avoiding the lamp niche and the basket of flint nodules you carried back in threes last week. Outside, the snow has skinned over with a crust that holds if you touch it gentler than you want to. The river speaks in a tight voice under ice. Wind has drawn its hand across the drifts and left lines you can read like a palm. The day's plan lives in many heads at once. You say little. Hands do the speaking. A glance to the ridge, and the old man answers with 2 fingers to say the wind will swing before midday. That will turn the smeller people away from the notch where the herd enters the flats. You lift a spear and feel it tell you about itself. Ash-shaved, true, tip darkened where it met fire, heavy where the haft binds a stone point that was not born of accident but of a long argument with a core. Your thumb rides the spine of that point and finds the faint ridge where the flakes wave froze. Tar binds, sinew grips, hide wraps, pressure smooths. The join is part glue, part promise. Before you go, there is always the slow task that buys a winter from a morning. A pit, lined with stone and warm from last night's fire, receives a roll of birch bark you sealed inside a clay cap, coals banked on top, a skin laid to smother air. The smell when you lift a corner hours later is sweet and bitter at once, like sap that remembers lightning. The black cake you lift from the pit is thought made tacky. A fingertip shines with it. It clings to wood, to stone, to skin. It yields to heat and hardens to stubbornness. You cut it into thumb pieces and store them under a flat rock where warmth will not steal them. Tar is a winter in your hand. The world outside is white and grey and black and breath. You move along the river's bank where ice shelves hold your weight if your steps are long and light. Your spear rides your shoulder. At your hip hangs a roll that holds edges for many jobs, thick for hide, thin for meat, toothy for bone. A boy pads behind you with a bundle of willow for a blind. He watches where you place your feet, then places his where yours were, so precise that the river could believe you were only one body stretched through time. Where the bank curves you stop and kneel and press a palm to snow to feel what it will not say out loud. The herd came through at dawn, hoof prints cupped with cold, urine pooled and frozen flat, a hair caught on willow that tastes of the animal when you hold it to your tongue. They took the path between the two hummocks because the wind had its knife out on the other ridge. You look to the notch and see the mistake the valley always offers. Snow drifts deep where the slope is steeper, and below the surface a seep of water has made a slick undercrust. Hooves will go through, legs will plunge, panic will make straight lines where the ground demands curves. You don't drive them yet. The others are already moving into place. One sets a tangle of brush in the side path that would offer escape, not to block it, but to whisper no to the part of a fleeing animal that wants to live. Another stands where the wind will carry scent the wrong way and lets his shadow rest on snow where he wants eyes to land. You take the long line around so you can be where the herd will be when it takes its second bad step. This is not a rush. It is the slow push of water. The plan is older than the scars on your shins. When it breaks all at once. Bodies thrum the ground. Breath bursts white from animal mouths and your own. The first stumble becomes a tangle. A young one goes down and pulls another sideways, and the line that is a herd becomes a shape that is mistakes. You do not scream. You make the sound that makes prey look where you want it to look. You show yourself and then unshow yourself, and your spear comes down from your shoulder and forward with your whole body behind it. The ash shaft takes the push and gives it back to the point. It is not pretty. It is close. You feel heat. You feel weight. You feel a hoof brush your thigh close enough to right a bruise for tomorrow. Then it is over. Not because you are strong, but because the herd wants to go where you wanted it to, and the one in front of you has stopped wanting anything. The ground keeps the rest of the story. Drag marks, blood darkening to brown, a broken tine in a drift. There is no waste. Meat goes to the sled and to the open mouths of those who carried empty bellies into morning. Bones you choose now, and bones you choose to leave for later. You cache some under a cairn you build elbow high, with a forked stick planted next to it pointing like a finger to a notch in the ridge, a sign that belongs to your people but looks like nothing to anyone who doesn't know it. Snow will take the scent and the cold will lock time down. When hunger writes its letter later, you will know where to read the reply. At the lakeside place, the wind sits low, and the shore makes a hook you can tuck behind. The work turns from sharp to patient. Long bones are lifted from sleds and cracked with a rhythm that gets into shoulders and knees. Tap to settle, strike to break, follow with the stone that fits your palm like an old thought. The woman with the best ears for the heat judges which stones are hot enough to argue with water, and which will only sulk. Hides become vessels with sticks for lips. You pour lake water and fill them with bone gravel that looks like frozen hail. Red stones go in with tongs cut from green wood. The hiss is always surprising, even when you know it. Steam writes temporary ghosts in cold air. The smell changes when the answer starts to come, meat sweet, clean. Fat pearls rise and are gathered, with a carved horn spoon to a bladder that will stiffen as evening cools its outside while inside the liquid remembers being sun and grass and the running of a body. Children carry stones and learn balance and hurry. They also learn to wait. The quiet between lifts is part of the job, not the absence of it. One floats a twig and watches it circle in the hide bowl where the hot stone has set a current. and his mouth tightens in that way that says the world made a new rule for him just now. You laugh, but not with your mouth. Later he will use that rule on a fire when the wind goes wrong. This place wears your visits like necklaces, charcoal lenses in the sand. A shelf of flat stones blackened from years of holding pots that are not pots. Cut marks on a log polished to a counter by generations of elbows. The ice here breaks last and freezes first. The fish run in a timing that has no numbers, but your hands know it anyway. Ravens sit in a alder and consider you with one eye, then the other, then decide to wait where the offal always goes. People from the other camp will come soon along the far shore. They turn their spears so points are up and visible, and you do the same. And the air feels like a held breath until someone sets down a bundle of flint with a different colour than yours, and a woman you do not know laughs in the way that means the same thing. Laughter means anywhere. Trade is not a ceremony. It is food. Turn to tools. Turn to more food. A spiral of talons that will live on a chest goes one way, a twist of resin the other. A word or two about the herd's path goes both. A boy from there and a girl from here look a blink too long and then blink away and later do not. Afternoon is for the slower inventions. You sit under the lee of the windbreak and split branch to thread with a flake that loves this job. Bast fibre comes away from willow like hair from a comb when your hands are patient and your knife is mean. Twisting turns plant into line, line into cord, cord into a net you open and close with one hand, because the other hand will be busy with a spear or a child or a pot. A woman with the long memory for measurements lays out lengths with the span between thumb and forefinger, again and again, and every span is the same because her hand has been teaching itself this lesson for years. The old man mends a crack in a wooden bowl with a butterfly-shaped patch carved from bone and tarred like a seam on a boat. The patch will outlive the bowl unless the bowl gets jealous and behaves. Tools are not just in your hands, they grow in your head. A map lives behind your eyes that has nothing to do with marks on stone. It holds the ridge where flint breathes, the stand of birch that gives bark that peels clean, the low pass that will stay open a week longer than the high one, the stretch of river that sings low when the ice is safe and high when it is about to betray you. You share this map with words that are mostly hands and body and the names of places that no one else would understand. The place where the fox laughed, the hill that bites boots, the hollow where the wind can't find you. Children try the names on their tongues the way they try a new edge on a stick. Hunting practice is work without meat. You stand with your back to the wind and hold the spear at hip and shoulder both. Weight forward, heel light, knee willing. A wrapped bundle of reeds becomes the place to put the point. You do not let the reed boy see when you will step, and he does not let you see when he will faint. The point must go where you look and where your foot says it should, not where fear says. You move in a circle. Your shoulders learn to keep quiet while the rest of you does not. Your breath stays in your throat until the moment you push and then it empties, not before. Your hands teach your ribs. Heat treatment is a patient heresy you learned 4 winters back when a woman from the coast camp showed you how to make difficult flinkkinder. You nest the nodules in warm ash near, not in, the coals and turn them when they sigh. Too hot and they sulk to powder, too cool and they keep their grudges. Just right and the blow that used to bounce now sings. You mark those stones with a notch that means do not crack me the old way. The old man watched you do it and said nothing the first time and said good the second time and asked if you would show the girl with the fox laugh the third time. You did. By late day the wind swings as promised, and you move the blind 5 paces to steal the scent knife from the herd trail. Someone climbs the alder to shake down the snow that will fall on you later if you do not ask it to fall now. Another pushes a thin spruce into snow and watches the powder sloof to see where it drifts deepest. That marks where hoof will find trouble. You set a line of little sticks along the path not to trip animals, but to tell you, in the morning in lines of tiny shadows, what passed while your eyes were shut. The river changes its voice under ice as light leaves it. You would swear it speaks words, but if you try to hear them, they fall apart. That is fine. Not every knowing needs a name. At camp again, the fat has set, pale and convincing. You press a thumb in and the dent shines back at you. You cut the block into chunks and press them into a clean hide, with dried blueberries and meat that was strips this morning and is now shreds. You push until the mixture lies dense and refuses air. Then fold the hide and bind it and mark it with 2 cuts and a dot so you can tell it from the other 3 in the dark. A food stone. A day held in your hand for a day when the day is selfish. Faces gather where the light is. A cough visits and leaves and is finally bored. The children's hands are black along the creases, whiter along the backs where snow polished them. The old man tells a short story about the time the river rose wrong in the night and put fish on the grass, and though everyone has heard it, and everyone knows where he will put the laugh happens anyway and is new because this time a boy hiccups into it and the girl with the fox laugh imitates the boy's hiccup and it becomes part of the story now. A woman hums a line for the dead that is also a line for the living. You hold your spear and do not polish it because the edge is good, and polishing for no reason is asking for the spirits to take the need away. Superstition, someone might say. Habit with teeth, you would answer if someone asked. You crawl into the skins with the spear's shaft under your arm and the point turned safely away and the smell of smoke in your hair and fat on your hands. The lamps flatten their flames when the door skin lifts and then rise again when it falls. You listen for the fox and the snow that drifts off a low branch, and the one note the river always finds when the cold is like this. Breath arranges itself in the cave, fast, slow, long, quiet. In a pattern you cannot draw but could find again in a dark the size of the world. Tomorrow there will be the notch and the herd and the plan that is never the same twice and always the same where it matters, and even if the herd does not come, there will be stone that wants convincing, and bark that wants to bleed glue and cord that wants to be rope, and the winter will go on making its questions and you will go on answering them with edges, with heat, with patience, with the kind of togetherness that makes the cold lean in and listen, and then step back. The cave takes the light from your lamp and teaches it to breathe. The flame is the length of your little finger, and the colour of fat when it first melts, a quiet gold that draws a small circle around your hands. Beyond it, the hall widens and lowers and widens again, a throat with places where the stone has learned to listen. Moisture ticks somewhere ahead at a steady pace like someone counting in the dark. Your breath smokes and vanishes. Underfoot the floor is slick in patches where old soot has polished the limestone to a dull shine. Someone long before today rubbed that patch without meaning to, leaning here to work or talk, and the place kept the memory the way your body keeps a song after the singer sleeps. You set the lamp on a ledge and open the pouch that rides your hip. Inside are colours pounded thin between stones, a red that lives in earth, a yellow that smells faintly of rust when it is wet, a black that gets into your fingerprints and refuses to leave until the river argues it away. A chewed twig makes a stiff brush. A bird bone, hollowed between teeth and flake, makes a whistle and a blower, and a way to move dust in a narrow stream. The wall in front of you is not a blank. It bulges where an animal's shoulder would be if the animal were sleeping inside it. It dips where a flank might hollow on a long breath. Your fingers test the contour and find a valley for a spine, a ridge for a horn. You do not outline a thing you have never touched. You coax a thing you know out of what is already here. First the simplest mark, the one that says I was in this room and it was like this. You press your palm flat to the cold, feel the stone reach through your skin. You blow. A cloud of red dust takes the space around the hand and not the hand itself. When you pull away, the wall keeps the absence as a shape. Other hands cluster nearby, some small, a child's reach, some broad, fingers scarred or shortened by accident and repair, some so old the dust has sunk into the pores and turned the limestone skin to another kind of hide. You set yours among them, the room nods back. Your lamp jumps once at a drop of water and then calms its own breathing again. You crouch, lean, and begin to lay lines where the rock decides to turn. A bison, head lowered in the way they lower it when the herd has agreed to do something complicated and risky. A deer with thin legs you make in doubles and triples, because legs move through time and light in a way a single line cannot catch. When the lamp wavers, the animal runs, and the child behind you gasps, because the wall just made a memory move. You add a small spray of dots at the edge of the panel, not decoration, but a pocket of counting that will mean something to someone who knows your number. Beside it you carve 4 short notches and a gap, and 4 and a gap, and then a long one. Moon keeping. Your aunt taught you where to set the long one so the next long one will fall in the right part of the next season. She learned it from a man whose hands shook and who still painted better than anyone alive, and he learned it from a woman who stopped a cough in a child with a bitter leaf and then sat up all night singing while the fever loosened. Near the back wall, a shelf has been cleared, not by tools so much as by attention. This is where you set the things that are not for the day's hunt. A string of pierced shells from a water so wide none of you have seen the far bank. A claw necklace whose curve sits exactly in the notch at the base of a throat where a lullaby rests. A figure from antler, carved with a belly too round to be realistic and therefore perfectly true. Your thumb has polished that figure smooth without meaning to, as if it were a thought that needs rounding each time you pass it. Children pick it up and put it down with a seriousness that does not need words. When a new child is named, the figure's belly gets an extra rub and returns to its ledge with a bit of fat to keep it from drying to a crack. The living need more than pictures, they need the kind of knowing that waits inside other people. And that kind of knowing leaves traces too. You carry water from the river in a skin that still smells faintly of the animal that loaned it to you. A boy brings in a pair of bundles wrapped in a hide. Herbs with roots you can only find where snow leaves early, and the slope faces south. Bark stripped in thin curls while the tree sleeps so the sap cannot complain. The healer keeps these in a pouch everyone in camp knows without being told to know it. Today she heats a stone at the edge of the coals and sets it into a wooden bowl half full of water and a curl of bark. Steam climbs, sharp and sweet. She holds the bowl under the nose of the old man whose ribs learned the hard song of a bison's hoof 2 winters ago and did not forget. He breathes the steam and his face softens out of its tightness, and when he coughs afterward, it is a gentler sound. Later she will smear a pitch that smells like forest breath on his chest, and draw lines with her thumb that line up with how he hurts, and he will sleep, and the camp will sleep because he can. Caring is a craft like any other, learned and practiced and carried forward. The woman whose foot healed wrong after a fall in a thaw walks on a stick that carries her weight where the ground forgives it. Someone carved the top of the stick to fit the exact shape of her palm, and when her hand found it the first time you could see the relief like you see heat. She cannot run a herd into a trap, but she hears birds changing their minds before anyone else does. She sits with the children and lays tools in the order they will need them, then waits while they try to do with wrists and patience what she could do with eyes closed. When a boy fumbles and takes off too much with a retouching flake, she makes a small sound that is not anger and shows what the flake can be instead. A drill, not a blade. The boy watches the new edge appear, and his shoulders drop out of his ears. The camp gains a drill. You do not save your dead by accident. When the breath goes out of a body that taught you how to find a winter's first good water, you wash the skin with a cloth that has always been used for that and nothing else. You grind red earth to powder and warm it in your hand and touch it to the places the person spoke from, the forehead, the tongue, the chest. If flowers are sleeping under snow, you bring needles from a tree whose scent says clean, clean, and lay them beneath. If a warm season takes someone and flowers are awake, you scatter their small suns where the ribs make a bowl. The hole in the cave floor is not deep, just to the depth of a forearm and a hand, but it is in a place where lamps burn steady and never smoke. The body is curled the way you have seen bodies curl when the day ends, and a soft-voiced story begins. A favourite tool goes under the left hand because the left hand held it best. A string of beads goes around the neck, even if you will need to make new beads tomorrow. A figure or a claw takes its place in the crook of an elbow. You listen for a while because the shape of a person making no sound is a kind of sound. Then you fill the earth back in and lay a flat stone and press your palms to it, everyone one by one, and the stone holds the heat for a long time and then does not. And after, you keep finding the person in the way your own hands move when you are not watching them. Evenings outside the cave are their own kind of room. A line of lamps turns the windbreak into an edge the dark is shy to cross. A bone with holes drilled the width of a flake's tip sings when a woman covers and uncovers the holes with fingers black with soot. It might be a reed flute instead, or a whistling tube with a notch cut sharp as a tooth, but the sound is the same sort of thing, the night picking up a tune and carrying it into the parts of camp the lamplight does not reach. Someone answers on a drum that used to be a shoulder and is now a skin stretched across a frame of willow. Another plays time on a bundle of hooves strung tight, rain that can be made to come when asked. Children fall asleep mid-dance and are carried to skins with the gentleness saved for blades and babies. A story begins in a voice that does not need to climb above the instruments. The one about the winter, when the ice grew teeth and the valley breathed smoke and the fish came to the door because the river forgot how to hold them. Everyone knows it. Everyone waits for the part where the old man tells it wrong on purpose and the small ones shout the right way and get to make the gesture that closes the mouth of the sky. He tells it wrong on purpose. The sky closes. Adornment is work and not work. A girl threads talons in a spiral that will sit high on the chest and speak to anyone watching without saying a word. These ants took a bird that sees far. A boy rubs bear fat into carved bone until it gleams the way snow does when the moon leans low. A woman combs hair with a fishbone that has learned to be a comb, splitting it into 3 lines that become 1 and then 3 again. Small shells hide in the braid and click like quiet teeth when she laughs. Paint makes language when tools are scarce. The man who learnt the hard way to keep out of the way of hooves wears a line of black down his cheek on hunt mornings, and you do not know what the mark means to the animals, but it means something to him, and that something steadies his breath and the spear goes where his eyes send it. Counting happens in many places and none of them have numbers as you would think of them later. Notches ride spear shafts, small ones that say this belongs to me, long ones that say this one has gone straight and true and come back with use and story. A tally on a rib shows the first fish of winter, the fish after that, the day the river fooled you with a skin that looked like safety but was not, the way your calf looks when it heals and then complains in the cold. The wall shows the moons. A stick shows the days until the people from the flat lake arrive with stone that breaks clean and heavy oil that burns in lamps without smoke. A cord with knots shows how many bladders of fat are left if no more bones are boiled and the weather refuses to soften. A boy invents his own record, lines scratched in frost with a fingertip, a poem the sun eats at noon. Visitors carry their own kinds of memory. People from upriver arrive with a child the size of your thigh and eyes that find everything at once. Their hands knot slings in a way that moves stone faster for the same length of arm. They set their lamps on the floor and lay out their treasures on a folded skin the way you do. The exchange looks like play and feels like food. Pitch for shell. A flake that cuts well in cold for a line that dries fast in wind. A story about a cave that has a roof that sounds like thunder for a gesture that shows the drift breaks here, not there. You sing together and find a note in the middle that belongs to no one but the two groups in that room at that time. A pair of young ones sit so close their knees, speak a whole other conversation. The elders look at one another from the sides of their eyes and do not frown. There is teaching that happens loud, and there is teaching that happens like water sliding under ice. A child falls asleep with a scraper in her fist and wakes with the first call and checks the edge before she checks her own feet. A boy watching a hand make a rope sees the rope, and the hand, and the shape the wrist learns, and does not yet realise he has learned to count without speaking. The old man reaches for the wrong tool on purpose and a small voice corrects him, and he says, "Oh," with a warmth that has nothing to do with mistakes. In the back of the cave, you lay out the order of work for the next day with objects in a line: stone, sinew, hide, bone, lamp, the figure, the shell string. No one moves them, but everyone sees the line when they pass the ledge, and in the morning hands reach for stone first. News moves in beads and scars and rhythms. You read a woman's story when she rolls up her sleeve to work and the ridge of puckered skin at her forearm says she met a boar's tusk and kept her tendons anyway. You hear of the far lake when a man hums a tune only people from the far lake know. You feel a change in the weather before the wind turns because the child who always sleeps deep turns twice and sighs and tucks his feet in when he has never needed to before. You sit up and add a slow stick to the fire, and the flame lifts as if it too has been told something. The room with the panel becomes a room with 2 panels, then 3. You do not rush to fill the walls. Time will do that. When you run a finger over a mark someone left long before your breath began, dust smudges your skin, and a smell comes up that is not today. You blow it away lightly and add your own dust to the corner where the animal's flank turns and it becomes yours as well. The child who watched you make the first hand on this wall returns and makes her own without you telling her to. Her palm is smaller, the gap between fingers is different. She laughs when she sees it, because she did not know she would look like that. You laugh with her, without being loud. At the edge of what the lamp will show, a pile of stones keeps a little heat inside it from a day when a fire sat there long enough to teach the rocks a lesson. Someone opens a birch bark roll, and the pitch inside is good. Still good. As if the world wants to help you hold on to the work that holds you together. Across the valley a wolf calls, and another answers, and another, and their voices plait into a rope that goes from hill to hill, while your rope goes from hand to hand, and from lamp to lamp, and from mark to mark. Outside, snow lifts off a bough in a sheet and falls as a slow, soft curtain that the wind takes apart and sends through the trees to the place where the river keeps its tight, cold voice. Inside, the story about the winter the fish came to the door becomes the story about the winter you learned to make the bison's legs run when the lamp wavered, and the child who made her first hand on the wall adds a line about the way the steam wrote a ghost. And everyone agrees that is part of the story now, and the knight sits down beside the fire like a person who knows they have a place in this room. They came with the south on their shoulders, light in their feet, reed baskets that smelled faintly of warm water, hair braided with little shells that clicked in the wind like shy teeth. You saw their smoke before you saw them, a thin line where the valley kinks and the river forgets itself. Then straight columns lifting from a rise that you had always used as a lookout. It put a new shape in your stomach, not hunger and not fear alone, the way thunder makes the air different even before the sound arrives. You stood and the others stood, and no one said the words for go or stay. Your bodies found the old lines without being told. Spears turned point up where they could be seen. Hands open and stayed empty. Children were gathered by a glance and drifted behind the windbreak as if the wind had thought of it first. They stepped into view in 2s and 3s, not a raid, not a river of people, but enough that you could feel their number the way you feel a herd through your shins when it runs. Faces like yours and not like yours, brows lighter, jaws narrower, eyes with a way of moving fast and then very still. Their clothes lay close to the body, sewn to follow shoulder and elbow and hip. The seams were so neat you had to look hard to see them at all. One woman wore a bone needle on a thong around her neck, and the hole in its end was a small impossibility that pulled your gaze the way a fire does after dusk. First, the old rules. Spears set down in the snow where the points could keep watch and feel useful. Palms turned to show nothing tucked there. Your old man stepped so the firelight licked his cheek and held his hands out from his body, wrists loose. Their old woman did the same. Everyone breathed. Then the other rules, the ones that grow between people the way moss grows where water lingers. A bundle laid on a flattened skin. Long, narrow blades of stone, thinner than a leaf, longer than your hand, each with a proud spine and edges that made your mouth water. Next to them, a coil of cord so fine it looked like hair until you touched it, and it bit back with strength. A little pot that rang when a fingernail tapped it and held water without complaint. Your side answered with tar that softened in a palm and then cured hard as promise, with a core already prepared into the right geometry for good blows, with a hide full of fat the colour of dawn. Things moved across the skin the way stories do, out of one hand through the middle where everyone could see into another hand that knew what to do next. They had words your mouth would not make easily, blowing through their lips like reeds in wind, and you had words their tongues kept tripping over and laughing at. It did not matter. Gesture has lived longer than any word and knows what to do when words forget themselves. A finger traced a path in ash. This river, that bend, the hill with a back like a sleeping boar. The place where the herd will always try to go if pushed on a day with wind in this quarter. A palm turned flat and hovered, moving slow, showing where to lay brush so a deer's eye will slide past it. A chin lifted toward the sky and then to the west and then to the sky again, meaning the weather will turn and then turn back, meaning wait, meaning do not waste yourself in the wrong afternoon. You saw other things too, without anyone putting them on the skin. Their camp stretched in both directions beyond your seeing, not here, but in the way their talk held the names of people who were not in the room, and the way their basket matched even when they were not made by the same hands, and the way a song started at one fire earned its reply from another, farther than a voice should carry. The lines between their bands ran long, braided from gifts and mates and promises you could hear hanging in the air when they spoke the name of a person you did not see, and the others smiled. Backup, the old man would have called it, if there were a word for being able to fall without breaking, because others will stand where you did a moment ago. Night took the slope one notch at a time. It always does, but this time you counted more carefully. They made their own fire a polite distance away, not a line between enemies, a space for two centres to be themselves. You carried a skin of fat to their circle, and held it out 2 hands' width, the way you would offer a newborn to a grandmother. Their old woman took the skin the way a grandmother would take a newborn and set it near the coals. She showed you the needle then, the little grace of its eye. Her hands moved in a dance your hands already wanted to learn. A strip of hide, a double thread of gut, a stitch that ran under and under again in one breath, and left no windhole. You felt the meaning of it in your shoulders, how a wind that could slip through your old seams would have to find another work to do, how your ribs would thank you on a hard morning, how a child's cough might be kept outside the skin a little longer than last year. Their men held their long blades like thoughts made into feathers. They were stone, not bone, but they behaved like bone in the hand, spring in them, a way of answering pressure with something more than refusal. They napped by pulling long strips from a single core, each blade the child of the last and the parent of the next, the core still holding promise when a Levallois dome would have given its last good shape. You showed them tar on wood and sinew laid wet and a wrap that made the glue hide inside where weather could not find it. One man tried to set a blade with only gut and pride. It worked until it didn't. He laughed when it twisted in his grip and nodded. When your smear and wrap made it part of the haft in a way that rain could not unteach. It is a kind of marriage, the binding of edge to arm. He recognised the ceremony, even if the vows were different. For a while it was only this, exchanges that rode meaning in both directions and landed standing up. Shelf a pitch, bone needle for a scraper that loved a curve. A song's phrase for the place where to stand so your shadow will make the deer look where your friend needs it to. A gesture for a laugh. A look for another look that went longer than looks usually go. But the body has news the tongue does not know yet. In the days after they left, a wet heat moved through your camp in a way the cold never had. A cough laid itself on chests that had carried winter easily. It was not the old cough you knew how to sing away with steam and bitter bark. This one clung, then went, then clung to the next person as if it had learned your names. You smoked the doorway, burned sap that would make even a dead nose pay attention, pressed warm stones to ribs, rubbed fat mixed with needle-leaf resin on sternums and backs. It passed, not for all, and not without taking something from those it left. In their camp, perhaps, something of yours travelled too, a fever they did not know how to read, a hunger that would not stay fed by the foods their guts were used to. The gifts of first meetings are not only bracelets and edges. Winter had been hard before, it became different. Snow fell dirty one year, ash mixed in the flakes like ground charcoal sifted through a hand. Days stayed grey beyond grey for almost a moon. On the morning the wind turned east, as if it had remembered an old quarrel. Birds did not rise at the first light the way they always do. Fish did not come to the hole where you always wait for them to be foolish. The old man pointed to the sky and said nothing, the way you point to a scar when the story is not for now. When the air cleared, the herds had changed their minds about the valley in a way they never had before, not later or earlier, but not at all. You waited in the notch where you always waited, and the snow drifted and did not gather hoof tracks on top of itself. When the herd did come, it came in a way that moved through you and did not leave anything behind except a question that lay heavy in the long bones of everyone around your fire. You would have ridden it out. You had before. Wait by your caches and take water where the wind cannot see it, and keep the lamp small and steady, and not let waste into the room. But the smoke on the far hills did not go away in your absence. It multiplied. When you went to the ridge you saw not one camp trying the next valley, but a line of camps like stepping stones, each within a day's walk of the next. If a patch of ground went light without hooves for a season, you used to find it again when it was dark with herds. Now, when you returned, the ground held new paths, narrower ones, trodden by lighter feet, people moving and meeting and moving again, a net you could throw and catch your hands in if you were not careful. Even so you met again by the river, this time when ice had loosened but not let go. They had a thing that turned your long throw into a longer one, wood hooked at the end, a pocket your dart's butt sat in, a hinge that let your arm add more of itself to the toss. You watched the first try and your jaw did the shape it always does when a new rule of the world clicks into a place it had been saving. When you held it, it felt like cheating, the good kind, the kind that makes the game fairer for your side. Your spear went farther than your arm had a right to send it to, and bit the snow against the far bank and stood there humming with the surprise of it all. You laughed louder than you meant to and did not apologise. They watched you work tar and took a little in a shell and nodded at how it understood heat and cold and how to change its mind at the right time. You watched them pull a string of plant fibre thin as hair and lay it double into a twist that pulled small things tight enough to make them behave like big ones. They showed you a sling that could turn a stone into a thought faster than a hand could keep up with. You showed them a hiding place along the shore where warm springs kept a mouth of water open even when the river was held, so fish that forgot themselves in winter could be reminded of their fate gently and then gratefully. That night you shared a hunt, not because anyone said we should, but because you were already moving together, when the deer slipped into the bend, where the alder makes a blind on its own. Your people took the slow flank, the pressure that turns a herd's wide mind into a narrow one without waking panic. Theirs took the wind wrong on purpose and let the wrongness sit right on their skin, and used the moment when the deer's heads lifted to make them look just past the safe gap into the old mistake the valley keeps for anyone who doesn't know it yet. When it was over, the deer lay where it should, and many hands did one job, then the next, in a rhythm that was so familiar it made your throat tight. You watched a man from their band cut a long strip of hide for a binding, exactly the way your aunt taught you, and he watched the last cut you made along a joint and the way your knife turned and your wrist did not, and you both nodded, not at the deer but at each other, because learning makes a kind of heat that needs no fire. Through all of it there were the small things that make the large ones more possible. A girl from their circle and a boy from yours wove a string together without looking at their hands because their eyes were busy looking at each other's mouths when they laughed. A woman from their fire left a little bundle of herbs at your door the day a baby was born too early, and the breath kept forgetting itself. You did not know the plant, but the smell it made when you crushed it under warm stones told you what it wanted to do, and the baby learned to keep breath like a lamp keeps a flame, small and stubborn. One of yours, a hunter with a limp that Weather likes to talk to, went with them when they followed the river away because a glance he had held and been held by wouldn't let go. He came back in a season with a cord at his throat that came from water farther than you could imagine, and news of a camp that was like this one, and not like this one where a story your old man told lived in another mouth and had learned a new ending. Not every meeting was smooth. There were days when you came to a bend and your plan and theirs wanted the same rib of land and the same wind and the same line of sight, and none of you had eaten since yesterday. Voices raised to a sharp edge, the kind that cuts even when it doesn't draw blood. Hands swept towards spears without finishing the gesture. Someone showed their teeth in a way that is not a smile. More often than not, the anger fell out of itself, because anger is heavy and meat is heavier, and a storm was watching and choosing a place to start, and no one wanted to be in the open when it made its choice. But sometimes the storm held and the anger held, and those were the days that left new lines on shoulders and hips and cheeks, and the old man talked longer when he made the fire, because quiet gets thick after that kind of day and needs thinning. Even when there was no fight, there were absences that had no shape you could bury. A camp you expected at the Flat Lake did not sit where the ground remembered it. The ash you dug through held just enough charcoal to make your fingers grey and no more. A child's comb with one tooth broken lay under a thin fall of silt. No footprints, not even old ones, not even in the places that keep them like secrets. It is a particular kind of tired, the tired that comes from setting out food in your mind for people who do not thrive and then eating that food with your body because meat does not keep, and hunger is a clock that does not care for grief. Spring came truer the year after the ash. The grass put up new blades like promises. Birds braided the dawn again and kept braiding it until dawn was a thick rope the day could pull on to stand up. The herds moved in a way that made sense again. You could have believed everything had gone back to the old shape if not for the way the hills held smoke and the number of hands you could count in the river's reflection when you bent to drink. If not for a cough that sometimes stayed beyond its welcome and left a rasp behind, even in the summer. If not for the way your young learned to sing a new tune, alongside the songs that call the herd and steady the grip. A counter melody, a braid. You walked north once, on legs that had learned to love distance, to see a thing they had told you about. A place where the ground itself is warm when winter tries to put its teeth in. There were people there too, not yours and not theirs, or perhaps both now, faces with your brows and their chins, or their brows and your chins, it did not matter. Children whose hands had a way of turning a stick in the fingers that made you think of two camps at once. They wore shells and claws. They told a story about a herd driven between two fires that glowed like eyes in a cave mouth, and the way their hands moved when they told it made your mouth want to tell it back with your own hands. On the cave wall above the hearth were lines you would have called yours, but the dots after them were in a pattern that belonged to someone else. It looked right anyway. In years when the wind came from the wrong place for too long, you turned your steps toward the sea. The air there has salt in it even when snow falls. The rocks wear muscles like armour that want to be food and do not know it yet. You learn to watch the sky for the low moon that pulls the water away and leaves gifts thinking it is safe to sleep. You learn too that others learned this before you did, and again you saw 2 fires where you might have seen one if you had come too soon. You watched hands working with a speed that would have been frantic if it had not been so practiced. Prying shells, twisting cord around a bird with a neck too thin to resist, lifting a net that sang with fish, all to the same rhythm you keep in the valley when a bison's hide is unzipped from neck to tail in a single breath. You shook your head at the strangeness of eating the sea, and then did not, because hunger does not care if meat tastes like grass or like tide. The camp there had figures scratched into stone, crosshatches and ladders and a shape like a woven mat that you could not make into animals no matter how you turned your head. The meaning walked away from you when you looked. You touched the scratches with 2 fingers, and some small part of your chest felt full anyway, the way it does when a baby catches a moth and lets it go without being told. All along these roads of smoke and shell and story you felt the weight of number, the way theirs held more cousins than yours did, more names you could drop into a song without having to count twice on the same hand. When a flood took a camp and the next valley over was empty, it used to make a space your people could grow into like a plant finding a crack in rock. Now, when a space opened, you saw it fill without asking you first, filled by people who had not buried their dead under that ceiling or named that bend, for the time a fox laughed. They were not wrong to stand there. Their children hung beads on their chests that knocked together when they ran and learned to put brushes and hands on stone the way you do, and mixed red with fat the way anyone would who wants the red to stay where they left it. They were simply there, and because there were so many somewheres, each there felt smaller in your hands. In your cave, the panel gathered more lines, not to crowd the old ones, but to keep them company. You added a spray of dots that meant notches on cords traded for shells, traded for a song you had not known last spring. A child who had hair like yours and eyes like the woman who had left with the river lifted her palm to the wall and made a hand that had both of you in it. She laughed before she saw it and laughed after she saw it in the same key. When she slept, her breath made the same little hiccup at the end of the long exhale that your father's breath made, and the same little, almost silent snore that belonged to the man from the south who taught you the stitch that closes wind out without making a seam stiff. The old man saw it and said nothing, his mouth bending around a smile that remembered more than it spoke. When storms came now, you felt 2 weathers, the one in the sky that stacked clouds like cliffs and threw light like spears, and the one in the ground that ran along paths you had not walked, but could nevertheless sense, feet moving toward you or away, help that might arrive if a child fell into a river or not, a song that might be sung over a fever or not. You learned to listen with your souls as much as with your ears. Sometimes the answer was go, sometimes stay. Sometimes it was sit by the fire and make the tar you will need next winter, because next winter will ask for it without saying please. The old rules kept working even as new ones grew around them. Open hands, spears where eyes can see them. Share when a storm pins 2 camps under the same rock lip. Teach a trick and learn one in the same day, so no one owes a debt to tomorrow. Sing the name of a person who is not in the room, and then leave a space after it where they could step if they arrive. Keep the dead near enough to warm you, and cool enough to let them sleep. These things did not change when the number of fires on the hills did. If anything, the room they made got more necessary. You felt it when you woke in the night to the river's tight voice and the fire's soft talk and the rasp of a feather on a string, as someone by the door tied a bead they had kept in their mouth to soften it. Toward an evening, on the day you met them again by the big bend, the day the woman with the needle showed you how to make a seam curl around a shoulder like a river around a rock, you walked to the low ridge above camp with a basket on your back, empty of anything except the habit of carrying weight. The sky was the colour of fat when it has just pulled itself together from a boil. Smoke pulled itself into long lines and lay across the horizon. Some lines were yours, some were theirs, some were from people whose names you did not know yet and wanted to learn. Between the lines, the wind ran with messages your ears could almost turn into words. Almost. You stood there until the air went cold enough to make your breath visible, and then you watched it leave your mouth and join the rest, and you said in your head what you had not said with your mouth. We are many, and the winter is large, and the road from here keeps going, and tomorrow the river will tell us how it wants to be crossed. The coast keeps a different calendar. Here the tide counts the day in breaths, in and out, a chest rising against the mouth of your cave, where the ceiling is smoke black to a human height and salt white above it, where spray is licked for longer than memory. You learn the moon with your ankles, how it pulls the water away and lays the rocks bare like a table set in a hurry, how it sends the sea back to hide what you could reach if only you had longer arms. You learn the sound that shellfish make when the cold snaps them into stillness and the crack that tells you the meat will be sweet. The wind is kind in the hour after dawn when cliffs hold it by the collar. Later it comes loose and goes hunting. You shape your day to the first voice, not the second. The valley taught you hooves. The shore teaches you fins and wings. Mussels cleave to rock in blue-black crowds. Limpets cling with the suction your knife must talk out of them. You follow bird trails along the cliff's edge to nests tucked in cracks. The eggs are a season's language. Thick-shelled early, thin-shelled late. Always a risk if the parent is still watching. People from your fire step into the foam with nets that smell of last summer's nettle and winter's smoke and lift them with a practiced heave that makes fish rise in a silver paragraph. Farther out, a dark back rolls and is gone, then another, and the old man's hand finds your sleeve without looking, the signal that means wait. Once in a while the sea forgets something large on the beach and the whole camp becomes gratitude. You cut meat that tastes like cold and iron in the far horizon. Fat renders from blubber exactly the way it renders from bones. Your spoon does not care what body taught it to shape. The caves along this edge hold light differently than the inland ones. The door opens to a coin of sea and sky, and the stone keeps the sound of waves like a jar holds a smell. You climb to the place where the wall dries between storms and score lines, where damp will not erase them. Not animals this time, but cross-hatches and ladders, and tracks of dots that catch the eye like fish scales. A child traces the scratches and makes a small approving sound like someone finding a familiar path in a new forest. When the wind presses the sea into the cave mouth, your lamp flickers and the animals you painted inland seem to swim, which is wrong and also right. Names thin here, not because you forget them, but because there are fewer new ones to teach the children when you touch their chests above the heart and say, "You are this and this belongs to you." The women count their bracelets with fewer shells than last year. You feel it first in the work. The rack that held 20 strips of meat today holds 12 tomorrow, and then 10. You feel it in the way laughter sits a little heavier, and in the long looks the elders exchange when a child's cough will not be sung away by steam and bitter bark. You make the pitches anyway, the decoctions, the poultices that draw heat out of the skin like a tide out of a cove, because the work is the prayer and the prayer is the work, and sometimes the body remembers how to be easy, and sometimes it does not. After the winter the sky turned grey and tasted faintly of stone. You learned to read the air for more than weather. Snow fell dirty for 3 days and your tongue came away from it with grit. The birds went quiet, even the greedy ones, even the ones that scold you when you come too close to their cliff shelves. For a moon the sun stayed behind a thin lid, and frost sank deeper into muscle and patience. Then came a thaw that felt like a trick, and then a freeze that felt like the truth. When the air cleared, the hills carried different smoke, long, steady, in lines that spoke of camps set close enough to borrow a coal without freezing it on the way. You counted more fires than the fingers you were willing to show the child on your knee. They were not your fires, and they were not strangers anymore either. Their children had hair the colour of dry grass and eyes that saw quick then stayed. Their song caught yours at the turn and rode it to a harmony that had not existed the winter before. It made the work go faster and your sleep go deeper, and a small guard in your throat stay where it had moved to without asking. You had expected hunger and storms. You had not expected a fever that walked from one camp to another, carrying your names in its pocket like stones collected from a riverbank and passing them out to bodies at random. The cough that had always been a winter visitor arrived in summer and brought weight in its hands. It was not the heat alone that took people, it was the way breath forgot its steps and had to be taught again each night and sometimes refused the lesson. You burned the pine that makes a sweet smoke and the resin that makes the bad air change its mind. You boiled water and listened to it talk and fed it leaves with unkind flavours and pressed cloths to throats and waited. Some mornings you sang the song that lifts and gave the dead the red touch on brow and tongue and chest and tucked them under stone where lamps do not waver. Some mornings you did not. You kept moving because moving makes its own heat. Up the estuary to the place where reeds whisper recipes. Over the headland to the narrow beach that the moon gives back to the world twice each month. Inland when the sea threw stones instead of gifts. Back to the cliff caves when the inland wind developed a taste for bones. The path between these places learned your weight, and the path learned others' weight too. Where you used to find your own tracks and fox tracks and the declarative line of a bird's foot, you began to find sandals with woven soles and human bare feet narrower than yours, and sometimes you found nothing at all because rain had taken the day and cleaned the ledger for its own purposes. When strangers' children sat by your fire, you learned new methods with old materials. They strung fish on a line knotted so cleverly that it opened with a tug that took less thought than swallowing. They shaped a loop of wood that lent your arm more arm and sent your dart to places where only deer and gulls thought they were safe. You showed them how to make a glue that didn't sulk in the wet. They showed you how to sew a hood that caught wind at the edges and turned it into quiet. They talked about cousins farther east and farther south and farther than that, with names that fell from their mouths like pebbles and bounced a long time before they settled. You talked about the hill with the two shadows that has told you the solstice every year since your mother's grandmother could stand without her stick, and you watched them try to keep the shape of that hill in their heads. You did not always agree on the ownership of a bend in a river, or the timing of a herd's return, or whether this patch of flat earth was for gourd and grain or for lying bone and lamp. Sometimes disagreements left bruises and lines that would tell their own story on a shoulder for years. But more often than not, the wind had eyes on you, and you had eyes on the wind, and the day was too busy keeping you upright to let a quarrel find legs. When there was food that would not keep, you shared it because hunger is a short word the body hears loudly and long. When there was knowledge that would not last, you spoke it because speech is only useful when it is moving. There were seasons when your road returned to the far west, where the land narrows and the sea speaks directly into your cave. Those caves remember everything. The floor carries grooves where hides were scraped by sfeeble you can only imagine now. The smoke on the ceiling is older than your oldest story. On a wall at shoulder height, someone carved a set of lines intersecting like crossed grass stalks. No body in them, no horn or hoof or eye. And yet the marks hang in the air like a net thrown over a shoal of thoughts. You add your own scratches next to them because it feels right in the hand, and because the stone accepts them with the same calm it gives to bison and deer. Children laugh there for no reason you can see. The room likes that sound and keeps a little of it to give back later. In those last thick winters, the herd paths you counted with your knees went quiet. Your traps for small meat stayed honest but grew timid with success. The caches tucked under cairns were waiting where you had left them, but your hand shook a little more when you opened them, and the fat did not hold its shape quite as well as it did when their skins were tied by wrists that were less thin. You sat longer when you stood and stood longer when you sat. It was not surrender, it was accounting. What do we have? What can we make? Who stands with us? How do we make today pay tomorrow, not just now? Children still arrived. They always do, even under thin skies, especially under thin skies. Their heads were sometimes a little smaller than you would have liked, but their hands reached for the same things children always reach for: edges, heat, the face of a person who loves them. They carried eyes like winter rivers and summer grass, without caring which camp that colour came from. A boy with your aunt's nose and a stranger's mouth learned to make a snare so delicately that Rabbit stepped into it as if to do him a favour. A girl with shoulders shaped like the South Priest's laughter, and a shadow like yours, learned to paint the double legs that turn a running animal into a moving one when the lamp breathes. They added a little twist to your song and made it better in a way you resented for the time it took to learn it, and loved forever after. Not all the old rules saved you. You kept your dead near. They did not keep you from becoming fewer. You taught your young to know the ground with their feet and the sky with their necks. They did not always get the chance to grow heavy with those knowings. You boiled bones to pull out winter. Winter sometimes swallowed the days before you could lick the spoon. The camps to the east had cousins for their cousins, and when a storm took their roofs, they borrowed other roofs for a while. Your circle, did we have enough people to borrow without losing the centre, made you you. You made the centre from habit and honesty and the comfort of a fire that knows the names of everyone who sits around it. You wrapped it in tar and sinew and song, and still the circle sometimes opened with a sound like dry bark. When the warm months were kind, you made more than food. A comb from rib with teeth filed so true hair could not hide a knot from it. A needle with an eye so neat the thread put itself through. A whistle from bird bone that called children home from the rocks without frightening the birds that nested there. A little figure from driftwood, the grain running like a story up its legs, that lived on a ledge and felt good in worrying fingers. A bowl patched with a butterfly of bone, where the wood had split and then unsplit under tar and patience. These were not luxury. They were proof of breath. The old man said, with his mouth and his stick in his eyes, that anything made beyond meat is a promise you keep for later, so later owes you something in return. You learned to watch the tide for more than food. It taught you that going and returning can be true at the same time. The water leaves and comes back and is the same water and also is not. The people who came from the south left and came back and were the same people and also were not. A man from your circle went with them, and a woman from theirs stayed with you, and their child's hand on stone was smaller than the new woman's and larger than the new man's, and exactly the size it needed to be to fit between your fingers when you crossed the rocks in a wind that had changed its mind twice already that morning, when the child slept and made the little, almost silent snore that had belonged to someone you buried last year, and a laugh that belonged to someone who had never seen snow. You felt your chest loosen in a place that had been tight since the sky tasted like rock. Sometimes the sea gave, and sometimes it took as if to balance its account. A storm rose with no proper warning and climbed the beach and walked into your cave as if it owned the door. You pulled skins and baskets and people to higher ledges, and lamps blew out and relit, and the smoke drew a new ceiling in a night. In the morning, kelp lay in ropes like hair from a giant, fish flapped where they had not intended to be, and your footprints had been wiped like a slate. You started writing again because hands that stop writing start forgetting, and forgetting is a kind of cold the fire has trouble teaching away. At the edge of spring, a stranger you knew came from the east with a name you could not say without feeling you were talking with your mouth full. He brought a blade with a back set so straight it could have been made by drawing a line with a bone pin against a stretched string, and a point that sat in a notch as if it had been born there instead of napped. He brought a tune that turned on itself like a river fold and a story about a valley where the deer had learned to avoid every old trick and 30 new ones too, because people on both sides of the valley had taught them to be different kinds of careful. He stayed a night and a night and a night and left with one of your scrapers and a necklace of 4 shells, and the next winter you heard your melody in a voice with more south and more east in it than you knew how to carry alone. You keep your map behind your eyes and it changes. It adds a cove that holds fish in east winds and removes a crossing that ice no longer builds. It adds a camp where lamps paint a new pattern on stone and removes a camp that used to borrow your fire and hasn't for too long and doesn't answer when you call toward the far cliff. It draws a path to a ridge you have walked since your feet were soft, with a little mark that means do not use when the sky smells like stone. It keeps the hill with 2 shadows and waits for the day when the shadow misses the old mark and hits a new one because the world has stood up a hair differently under the sun. At night you listen, and the listening makes rooms. The sea says its slow syllables. The fire says yes to everything that wants to be warm. The child says a word in sleep that belongs to a river you have never seen. In the back of the cave, the scratches you made without animals in them hold their place and do not ask to be anything else. At the mouth of the cave, the air feels different in a way that means the weather will change by the time the tide turns twice. The people at your fire settle and settle again as if breathing with the tide. And the lamps write small ovals on the wall that look like eyes if you forget and like lamps if you remember. You touch the stone and it is cool and patient and remembers more than you do and does not mind. The tide turns, and in the dark outside something, bird or seal or person, calls and is answered, and you lift your head, and the night lifts its head with you. Tomorrow pulls at you the way water pulls at stone at the mouth of a cave, and you feel yourself lean without moving, and then decide whether to stand or sleep, and you hold that deciding for one more breath, one more slow count, one more listening, while the last of the embers remember how to glow. The fire is a quiet circle now, a warm coin in the dark. We've walked with them, through snow that rang like glass, past walls that remember hands, down to the tide that keeps its own slow time, and found their breath still living in ours. Let your shoulders fall, unclench your jaw. Feel how easy the room becomes when you do. The same stars that silvered their winters are hanging over you tonight, unchanged and patient. If this story helped you drift, I'd love to have you back. Tap like, hit subscribe, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from right now. Close your eyes. Keep the lamp's small glow, the steady hush of the tide, and the knowledge that you carry their resilience in every cell. Sleep well, traveller. I'll meet you in the next story under the same old sky.